Alrighty, guys. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Let's see how this does under the bear mask. First and foremost, just want to say thank you to the team at the Hack VC and Hack Summit for having me here. I think it requires quite a bit of courage and truly some range to have a man like Joseph followed by a guy in a bear mask. So I truly appreciate it. I'm here to tell you guys a little bit today about Berachain, the backstory, the lore, the reason to some extent I'm in a bear mask, everything in between that's actually led us to this moment, and what we have to see over the next few months and hopefully years and decades to come out of Berachain. So I'll start by giving a little bit of background on sort of the founding story per se and how we got here, and then I'll start by just diving into the tokenomics, what Berachain actually aims to achieve. I'm going to try to hit the next slide. I'm just going to point for that if that's cool. Unless there's a pointer somewhere? No? Okay, awesome. So, Berachain in a nutshell, we'll start by just going through the basics. Berachain is actually an EVM-compatible L1 that is built on top of the Cosmos SDK. This allows developers to absolutely deploy Solidity-equivalent code without any issues, as they might on mainnet, Arbitrum, etc. But the twist is we're powered by something called Proof of Liquidity Consensus, which is really a variant of Delegated Proof of Stake. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. The peripheral vision in this, as you can imagine, not ideal. So we'll start with a little bit of the story. At one point, there were a bunch of NFTs of bears. Something happened in the middle. We're still doing quite a bit of work to figure out exactly what that might be. But we've ended up with a blockchain. The RTO testnet is active at the moment, and we'll hopefully see a class of developers building exciting applications with this over the next little while. And it's actually become very quickly over the last 2 months one of the most active testnets in history, with 8 million unique wallets, and at this time, over 120 million transactions processed on the network, which has been incredibly exciting to see. Now, to actually get through how we got here, Berachain didn't start as a chain. It started as something wildly different out of the bowels of DeFi Summer / DeFi 2.0. Berachain started as a project that consisted of 100 bears consuming cannabis. This is not due to our cultural differences or due to our love of said things, rather simply because we thought it was funny at the time. Myself and my co-founder Papa had been spending a meaningful amount of time, in crypto since 2015, 2016, and I think in that summer of 2021 timeframe, we started to see the first NFTs that were actually interesting. There was stuff like Parallel TCG, which is now home of the Prime token, groups that were doing more than 10,000 profile pictures, but actually finding ways to embed some degree of utility and further value to an NFT itself. And we thought to ourselves, maybe there should be something fun that we could do here. There wasn't a grandiose vision, there wasn't an end game in sight, there were simply NFTs of bears. Over time, we thought that it could be kind of cool to actually see what we could do to push the envelope of this technology. So we distributed that initial set of 100 bear NFTs across a number of these DeFi native communities. So think Curve, Frax, Olympus, Alchemics, all these groups that really set the stage for the next evolutions of DeFi and became home like base plates. Following a model that was first pioneered by Olympus DAO, we actually decided to make these NFTs rebase. So what that meant was that if you had a collection of 100 NFTs, there would eventually be a second collection that had another 100 and change, another 200 and change, and so on and so forth. So what we actually ended up achieving was economies of scale around, well, I'm going to try this one more time. There we go. We ended up with economies of scale around, multiplying bears. I promise I'll get to the actual Berachain part soon. So what happened was, over time, this ended up being a really interesting distribution method because we ended up amassing thousands of holders while incentivizing our earliest holders and rewarding our earliest community members. And overall, as supply increased, allowing those initial groups to really distribute that supply and bring more and more people into this ecosystem. These ended up being themed. There were some that were James Bond themed. There were some that were Halloween themed. There were Christmas and Boxing Day themed ones. There were bands after their favorite artists. And then there were these 8-bit bears that we teamed up with people a couple years ago on. And that really takes us to where Berachain is now-ish. I'm really having fun with this remote. Sorry, guys. Okay, so one of the most important ingredients that we've seen in Berachain is actually the community itself. And this is something that we've learned a lot about and studied, I'd say, quite intensively as people have asked us about our growth over the last couple of years. And I think that what we found, especially from having seeded our community with these DeFi natives who were then basically getting involved in a relatively risk-on asset of an NFT, was that we ended up with a group that was very emblematic of, barbell or horseshoe theory. This is commonly seen in the political sense in the case of horseshoe theory, but really the thesis is that at some point the far left and the far right very much converge. So on one hand, you had a group of folks who said, hey, here's a funny JPEG of a bear, I'm going to buy this. On the other hand, you had a group who said, hey, these guys are hanging out in the right discords, these guys are involved in the right projects, maybe there's something going on here. And I think what we did differently from a number of other protocols that I haven't seen as much in the past was that as opposed to spinning out, a novel consensus technology from a top leading research institution, et cetera, we did perhaps the most illogical thing that one can do in Web3, which is we talk to our users, we talk to builders, we talk to developers within this already built ecosystem of NFT lovers and DeFi users. And we actually tried to identify the problems that they were facing in their day-to-day lives, along with the logical fallacies that they saw in their on-chain world/environments. And what we really found was that there was a meaningful missing piece in the current models around proof of stake. In that when you actually look at the proof of stake model, it means that capital that is securing a blockchain is inherently taking away from the liquidity that's living on this chain. This is prior to the advent of Lido, Eigenlayer, et cetera, all of which serve a similar purpose, but in a very specified and non-generalized sense. And what we just thought was quite illogical was that there were these dozens of ghost chains, if you will, with hundreds of millions of TVL and occasionally even billions of stake sitting in their validator sets, allowing for an incredibly secure network, but with little to no activity, if any, on the network. So that discrepancy was often between 10 and 100-fold between the value securing the chain and the value actually doing any active work on the chain. And this is how the idea of proof of liquidity was really born. So proof of liquidity was developed to effectively make liquidity flexible. And what we really tried to do here was, from learning from those insights from our early community members, we thought to ourselves, how do we find a way to actually give people edge, right? How do we find a way for it to make sense for liquidity to serve as a form of security without actually adding leverage risk, et cetera? And perhaps even more importantly, how do we use that to actually build an ecosystem that benefits the people that are building on top of the chain? I think what we often saw as we went through a number of these steps was that there was no real way of driving value to applications building on a chain in a lot of these general purpose L1s that we saw. So, to give a high level of how proof of liquidity actually works, the major difference from delegated proof of stake or standard proof of stake is that when block rewards are produced on Berachain, they do not actually just stay with the validator set. When a block is produced, those rewards or those liquidity incentives, if you will, are actually directed to applications that are building on the ecosystem. This means that on one hand, the validators have unprecedented economic influence over the Berachain network itself, but also that the only way to earn liquidity on the net, or to earn security on the network and to produce that BGT token per se that secures it that I'll talk about, is by actually doing the work of providing liquidity and contributing to the ecosystem itself. And what this fundamentally enables at the end of the day is that Berachain becomes the first and only blockchain which powers its applications and gives them a fundamental reason from an economic perspective to exist on the chain. Oh, there we go. So, when we think about it, proof of liquidity is built to service builders who in turn are there to service users. You have this flywheel where users are interacting or staking with validators. Validators use a module that's called Berachain. So if anyone's familiar with the sushi ecosystem or, contract distributors, MasterChef, a little bit of a play on that. And that actually distributes those block rewards across applications building on the chain. Once again, users interact with these applications, they earn rewards, and the cycle repeats. So we'll go through the tokenomics very quickly. There are two major tokens that define Berachain. There's one that is called BGT, or the Bearer Governance Token. This one's a little bit on the nose, but it gets the job done. And Bearer Governance Token is a staking and or governance token of the network. Now, the interesting thing or the spicy thing about BGT compared to general blockchain tokens or general proof of stake tokens is that it is entirely illiquid. And it cannot actually be market bought on Binance. It cannot be found on Uniswap, etc. The only way to actually obtain this token is by doing the work of providing liquidity to one of the applications in the ecosystem that has been approved by governance to generate and or distribute BGT. So what that means is that it enforces an equivalent exchange or an exchange value in order to actually earn this network staking token. It does a couple of different things. This is what validators use to direct emissions across the network. This is what users stake with validators. And this is actually a fee-earning token, such that the users and the validators that are effectively helping to power the applications on the chain have some upside from their own operation and their own volume that's flowing through those applications. Then, we have BERA. BERA is the native gas token of the chain. This one's a little bit more self-explanatory, and it's as, basic or vanilla of a gas token as possible, in that BERA allows you to simply pay network fees. I'm going to try another couple times on the slides. There we go. You pay fees with BERA, not much spicier than that. Try to keep it pretty simple. The other important thing to note here is that at any point in time, 1 BGT on Berachain may be burned into 1 BERA. This cannot be reversed. This actually enforces that the only way to even be able to effectively transact on the network is by having first done the work of providing liquidity. And what this really enforces is that as the network scales over time, its liquidity and security profiles, basically grow in tandem. So, when we look at the value flows in Berachain, in contrast to a traditional proof-of-stake chain, as opposed to value flowing from the users to the applications to the validators, as it typically does in a proof-of-stake chain, we actually see that model flipped on its head. So we see validators directing value to the applications and the users that are building on the network. So this prompts a pretty important question, which is, to some extent, why does all this matter? Why is it important for us to do so? We'll go through the economic incentives and the overall incentives for each of the parties in this equation really quickly. Like I mentioned, validators control the economic incentives of the network. They actually say which pool, which application, which group earns the most rewards, and overall helps incentivize different groups on the chain. This actually means that validators are very much incentivized to work closely with protocols to help them bootstrap their own liquidity and to help them find success on a new network. They are, on the other hand, actually working with these protocols to earn part of their own native tokens, their fees, their emissions, such that the validators that contribute the most to the ecosystem and help as many of these early protocols as possible achieve activation energy are the ones who tend to benefit the most economically. And finally, of course, validators are always trying to earn fees and commissions, so they do that too. When we look at the protocols are meant to actually use governance and the BGT system itself to incentivize more emissions to flow towards their own pools. They're meant to work closely with validators and incentivize them, whether that be with their native token emissions, fee earning structures, etc., to work with them to bootstrap their own liquidity. And they're, of course, meant to be in a competitive environment where these protocols are competing for those slots and competing for the ability to have more and more validators driving emissions towards their protocols. So users have to actually do the least to modify their behavior. They contribute liquidity towards whatever applications they might enjoy the most, and at the same time, they are able to earn the native emission tokens of those applications, along with BGT, trading fees, block rewards, everything else. So the system really is meant to give users the best experience possible. So the way that we think about this at the end of the day is that Berachain's long-term outcomes and its direction itself is really dictated by those that actually contribute the most value to the network. And I think that is the core principle that we're trying to enforce above all else when it comes to Berachain. Now, the real reason that we think about all this is because when we think about the long-term future of Web3, crypto as a whole, the next million, the next billion users, part of which has become a meme, and part of which we hope to very much become a reality over the next couple years, whether that be through abstraction, whether that be through better scaling solutions, whether that be through better incentive alignment solutions like Berachain. Really, in order for the space to reach a critical mass, it means that there have to be a set of applications that only exist on-chain, that do not exist on traditional Web 2 rails, that you cannot just access from your bank, that you cannot just access from a website, that actually lean into the things that you can only achieve in crypto, in terms of transparency, in terms of a permissionless nature, in terms of verifiability. And those things really require a number of application developers to actually have the tools to achieve escape velocity, breakout energy. And when we think about ourselves or a network as a whole, the chain is not meant to be the main character. The chain is the operating system. The chain is the base plate. It's meant to really be more than anything else the sum of the applications that are building on top of it. And our goal is to effectively enable as many top-tier builders as possible to help build some of the best applications possible that can really go from 0 to 1. And now, while we are in the absolute earliest stages of this game, and we are simply at a testnet phase, we've been humbled, shocked, excited by the amount of traction that we've seen around proof of liquidity and around the Berachain model as a whole. This combination of the far left and the far right curve and a dude in a bear mask. And the way that we see this is actually within the ecosystem itself. There are 200 plus novel applications being built on the chain. There's at least 10 new DeFi primitives that we've seen being cooked up. There are over 5 projects that have brought on millions and millions of users into the ecosystem. There are 50 plus different token generation events planned on the chain, giving these new users a chance to actually explore and speculate on novel assets. And perhaps most importantly in the short term, while raising funds are by no means a measure of success, I think they're very much a measure of interest and a belief in the ecosystem. And we've, prior to launch, actually seen $25 million plus raised by ecosystem projects. So the end goal really here, more than anything else, is for us to actually ensure that Berachain is the best place to take your application from 0 to 1, and really that in the future, Berachain is the home of the next category-defining application as we remove, the limitations, as we reduce the activation energy, and as we increase escape velocity for application builders of the future. Thank you so much, guys. Great having you.